It's Steve Curtis Chapman. Remember to remember. You're on Vision Christian Radio. It is Neil with you. It's the Wednesday edition of 2020. Shortly, we will open our talkback line. You might like to interact on a very important topic that we'll be discussing today around the idea of raising tech-healthy humans. Especially interesting for parents, but grandparents too also. Can be in on the responsibility here. You know, it's a tough thing being a parent today. It's a fast-changing world. It's a fast-changing high-tech world. And even busy parents who are stretched for time will be searching for insight into this tech world as it influences our kids' faith and discipleship. So our special guest today writes about kids, tech, about productivity, and about making space. He's set out to help kids enjoy the online world without losing the wonders of life beyond the screen. Sometimes we might wonder how our choices of technology within a family context are in fact a faith and discipleship issue. Well, Daniel Sih is back with us. He's written a handbook that teaches strategies to help set up children and preteens with healthy tech and non-tech habits for life. His new book is called Raising Tech-Healthy Humans: How to Reset Your Children's Tech Habits and Give Them a Great Start to Life. Daniel's an award-winning author, TEDx speaker and productivity expert. His latest book's also been shortlisted for this year's Australian Christian Book of the Year Awards. Daniel, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's great to be here.
Hey, Daniel, the book, and I must say I haven't read it, but I understand it's not a long book. It's a 2-hour read. It's something that perhaps a lot of people will say, this is just the insight I need. What's the reasoning behind just a short book like this one?
Yeah, so look, my last book was a lot longer. It took me a lot longer to write. And I suppose just listening to people and how busy parents are, I realized that we just find it really hard to finish a book. A lot of people read the first 120 pages of a book and they never quite finish it, even if the book is good. And so I just thought, how do I put in the best stuff and the most important stuff from my parenting conversations, coaching and parenting forums into a short book? And basically I gave it to my editor and said, let's rip out anything that's not absolutely essential so that parents can read it in 2 hours. And generally it's about a 2 to maybe 2 hour, 20-minute read. And I think that works for parents.
It will work, certainly, and anyone who's a busy parent may well be attracted by the thought that it's not a 3-week read. Hey, your first book, which was called Space Maker, it was about tech too, how to unplug, unwind, and think clearly in the digital age. This one's got much more of a focus on the kids.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I speak with audiences really around Australia and sometimes globally around technology overuse. That's what my TED Talk was about, which is about why as adults, leaders, professionals, we're feeling overwhelmed, stretched and struggling with attention and focus. And some of it, at least, is because of how much we're practicing the internet and what it's doing to our mind and our hearts. But when I speak, basically, I have Q&A, and the number one question that has always come up is, well, can you help my kids make space? Because they're even more addicted than me. And so because of the amount of time I'd spent reading, and I also run parenting forums, I thought, okay, it's time to write a specific book. Because tech and kids is very different from tech and adults, even though some of the addictive design and some of the problems of inattention and focus are the same. There's a very different thing happening because of the development of their brain. And that's what I wanted to focus on in this book.
You know, you use that word addiction, and this is early in our conversation, but I wonder if you've got any thoughts on how this affects kids even more than adults. My suspicion is that kids are even more in that sort of addictive space when they get a hold of this sort of technology. Any thoughts here about the difference between kids and adults and the way we just get really all consumed by these things?
Yeah, absolutely. How I go about on this. Look, so I don't use the term addiction in my book because I've tried to steer clear of any kind of I'm not a medical practitioner, so I wanted to be careful about where I enter and where I don't. But I do know a lot about technology, and I've read a lot about technology in the brain. And so I like the work of Dr. Daniel Sih, and he talks about an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. And if you're listening on radio, you won't see this, but if you're watching, if you make a fist, it actually represents the downstairs brain, like the brainstem and amygdala, and that's like the fight, flight, freeze parts of the brain. And that's well developed in kids as well as adults. So that's where you touch a stove and whoop, you take your hand off, and then you realize, oh, I've touched a hot stove. So you react before you think. And that's designed as a mechanism in your brain to protect you from danger. But then you've got the top part of your brain, the upstairs brain. And so again, on this video, if you put your other hand on top of your fist, it represents the squiggly parts of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex. And that's where you develop adult maturity. We might call it even fruits of the spirit, like love, joy, patience, kindness, humility, self-control. You develop the adult traits that are not in children from birth. They don't have empathy in the way that an adult should have empathy. They don't have self-control. They don't have impulse control. They don't have all those adult executive functionings of thinking deeply and having conceptual reasoning that develop through practice over time. Now, I need to give you that understanding, because the problem is with technology, it stimulates and ramps up the downstairs brain, the fight, flight, freeze part, the part that creates anxiety and increases particular motivational drugs in your brain, neurotransmitters like dopamine, and actually causes you to be highly engaged, but in a somewhat addictive way if your brain isn't old enough and isn't developed. And the research is showing that with MRI studies, last bit of information, that when kids overuse the internet, they don't develop the upstairs brain in the way they should. They lose areas of their brain which are related to empathy and self-control and mood regulation. So essentially, kids don't have the type of brain that can manage the highly addictive pokey-like apps and devices that we're giving them at such a young age, which is why it's different than with adults.
Well, what a wonderful illustration that is, Daniel, and the downstairs brain, the upstairs brain, and recognising that in that place of the upstairs brain, those sorts of issues around empathy, and you describe that really, really powerful if you're bringing a scriptural illustration in here, the fruit of the Spirit. And listeners who'll know their scriptures out of Galatians and the fruit of the Spirit, that's contrasted to the fruit of the flesh. And that's all sorts of, all sorts of bad behaviours. So is there a sense in which, because we're drawn to those bad behaviours, if you don't take some responsibility as a parent and recognise that the fruit of the Spirit is a part of the discipleship of your child, then the fruit of the flesh is more likely to come to the fore with the use of this tech world? Is that a reasonable way of suggesting that's, the difference?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously tech can be useful, and we want to think about the benefits of technology and where it's useful. But I do think that a lot of the design of technology, particularly for kids, apps and games like Minecraft, Fortnite, the kind of pokey machine-like games that they use, are really designed to stimulate parts of their brain, their heart, their mind that are reactive, short-term, and don't draw them towards, like you said, the fruit of the Spirit. I think about another epistle where Paul says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Or Jesus, who says that we are to love the Lord our God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength. So the question I ask audiences is, how are the technologies and apps you're giving your children, your young children, I'm talking about primary school and younger, how are they impacting a child's heart, mind, soul, and strength? Is it leading them towards Jesus? Is it renewing their mind towards faithfulness, patience, kindness, love, and self-control? Or is it causing them to be reactive and irritable and impatient and angry and lose the ability to enjoy the rest of life and relationships? And so it's not a binary thing. It's not black or white, yes or no. But I think we need to really think deeply about the impact of technology on our kids' brain and their formation as disciples of Jesus.
Okay, it's one thing to talk about our kids' engagement with games, or it could be all sorts of things that might be addictive and the things that they might look at online. But there's also a lot of good stuff that we do want our kids to be astute in the way they handle these things, because you know what? Isn't it fabulous if you've got faraway family members when you can do, a video call? When you can send a text message, when you can email and use social media for just keeping in touch. A lot of school homework perhaps is being done on computer and on devices and such things too. So there's all sorts of good things that you don't want to lose, but in some ways you've got to be able to help shape and control these other not so good influences. Is that a fair way of balancing things?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I think that the question is always, how is this forming my child? Is it forming them to be healthy, loving, well-balanced, faithful adults as they grow up? Are the habits or the digital liturgies of their life forming them in ways that will make them better humans? Or is it forming them in ways that will make them unhealthy? So, I mean, my kids use technology all the time in very particular ways within boundaries and with filters. And so I love that they're learning to do block-based coding. I love that they're learning Chinese through Duolingo. I love that my son can type faster than me now because of his typing tutor interests. And he's developed his strategy interests because of some of the strategy board games we've given him online. So it's not that I think we should disconnect entirely from technology, but I do have a strong message for parents with very young kids that a lot of the apps that are marketed to kids, even educational apps, really aren't good for their brains and their development. So the younger the child, let's say between 0 and 5, the more significantly apps that flash and have lots of colors and lots of movement, or variable rewards, like I'm digging in Minecraft and I suddenly get diamonds. That's a poking machine type mechanism. Or where there's social cues, anything to do with like social media where you get likes and social reinforcement by being online. All of that is very powerful in its design. And I think too powerful for young brains to use. So television, passive TV screens are quite different. Watching a movie is quite a different thing for the mind than an iPad or an interactive screen, particularly for young kids. And then my advice as kids get older and they need to engage more in the online world is to go slower than the culture around us and to grade up as they grow up, as they develop those executive functions and can demonstrate limitations and self-control and self-awareness of screen time. Well, then you can increase, obviously, their use of technology to the point where they're fantastic at technology because they have a healthy brain, a healthy heart, and they know how to put technology within the context of life rather than making it the gravitational center of their life, which is where things become a problem.
Daniel, let me ask you about Christian parents, because there'll be some who are so concerned with some of the bad things that can happen in an online environment and use of screen time and addictive nature of children, all those sorts of things. There are some who'll take the measure that says, we will just ban that until they're old enough to be able to, be a little bit more self-controlled with their use of it. And then the other that says, well, I'm going to just, I'm going to ignore all of that insight because surely this is the way society's going and my kids need to be into this. And, if you avoid or ignore some of these thoughts, the likelihood is you're probably going to have some pretty bad outcomes. When you think about outcomes, the parent who takes control and the parent who leaves it open slather, what sort of outcomes do you think might look a little different with the sorts of things that you do to control screen time for your kids?
That's a really good question. And I think it depends on the culture we're in and the age of the child. I can't say that enough that the age of the child matters in terms of what's appropriate and what's not. I had a conversation. I ran a parenting forum in Melbourne a few months ago, and a lady came up to me and she said, look, my daughter is really pushing hard for a phone, and it's causing pain in our relationship, and I'm worried that it'll tear us apart relationally. And yet I'm just so firm because I know how bad social media is. I've read the research, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, oh, my daughter was terrified about me coming to your forum because it'll just reinforce what I've said. So I said to the lady, oh, how old's your daughter? And she said she's 16. I'm like, oh, well, at 16, I think your daughter's nearly an adult. And it's probably time to give her a phone. and yes, have filters and have restrictions on how much time she might be on particular apps. But it's probably time to actually lighten up and give her a device. So her daughter was pleasantly surprised that she went to a tech forum parenting seminar and ended up with a phone. But at the same time, I would say to a parent whose 8-year-old is nagging them for a phone, I'm like, it's way too early. Like, your child does not have the ability. It's not about their personality. Their brain does not have the capacity to moderate and manage the types of addictive design within the apps that you're going to give them in order to actually use that in a safe and healthy way. If you need them to have a phone for safety, then give them a dumb phone that doesn't have the internet. But the internet is an incredibly powerful device, and it opens your world to the adult world. And so it's about when and how, and even when they get their phones and their tablets and devices, don't give it to them out of the box. Make sure that there are contracts and filters and guardrails in place so that they don't get a fully fledged open adult device as a child. So I hope that helps. It's nuanced.
Yes, well,
it's not a black and white answer.
The should I, shouldn't I, and what age is appropriate, in some sense, this is just getting out of the starter blocks, isn't it? Because my suspicion is that lots of parents are not thinking of a discipleship issue with their kids when they're thinking of that. They might be thinking of a protection issue, but when you start to introduce discipleship into there, then you've got to be able to say, what do we do with the steps that we do take and the things that we do allow? And discipleship, this is one of those things that you've taken a great interest in.
Oh, absolutely. So, look, just for a definition, I mean, I think discipleship is the main game for Christianity. And Jesus talks a lot about discipleship. He doesn't talk a lot about Christianity or being a Christian. So the word disciple in Greek is mathetes. I used to be a pastor for 10 years, so there is a bit of a background here. So mathetes basically means pupil or learner, but probably the more accurate translation in our Western context is apprentice. John Mark Comer and Dallas Willard use apprentice of Jesus instead of disciple of Jesus. And I really like that, because an apprentice is someone who orientates their heart, their mind, their soul, their strength, their habits around the person of Jesus to become like he would be if he was them. So like an apprentice builder becomes an apprentice, well, it's about copying Jesus in terms of our habits and our mindsets. And I totally agree that if we start with discipleship as our foundation, if we're Christian families, well, then that's absolutely the right place to start. Once you start with cyber safety and bullying and all that kind of, online pornography, that stuff's really, really important to tackle. But I see that as like hospital care. I used to be a physiotherapist as well, as opposed to primary care, where it's like, well, primary care is prevention, and the prevention is putting in the right sets of boundaries and guardrails to start with before you end up with like a hospital issue. And that's what discipleship is. So may I just give one more story about
Sure.
Raise adults, not children.
Yep.
So when my first child was born, my best friend Mick said, "Don't forget you're raising adults, not children." And I loved that. And I write about this in my book. And he wasn't saying we should give our kids adult responsibilities before their time, because there's something beautiful about play and running along the beach naked and, having tantrums and having fun and frivolity. Like, play is an incredibly important part of childhood that creates healthy adults. But what he was saying is, when you make decisions, think about the end in mind. Think about what type of disciple they will be, what type of person you're forming through the habits they're creating. So if they don't eat their veggies on a regular basis, will that make them a better adult? Probably not. If they don't go to bed on time, well, it probably won't create a healthy adult who can sleep and have healthy disciplines and boundaries. And so therefore you put in the hard work when they're young. I suppose the question needs to be asked with the technologies we give our kids: how might this device or use of this screen time or use of this app, how might that form their mind, their heart, their habits in the ways of Jesus? What will be the consequence to their long-term adulthood by engaging in this for 2-3 hours a day? And that's the way we need to think. That's a discipleship way of thinking. Does that make sense, Neil?
That makes sense. Hey, I want to invite listeners to join into our conversation. You can help direct where we go. You might have your own thoughts. You might have a question. You might have been sparked in some thinking by some of the things already said. Daniel Sih is our guest. He's written what is just like a handbook that teaches strategies to help set up children and preteens with healthy tech and non-tech habits for life. His book is called Raising Tech Healthy Humans. And you can call us on 1-800-316-316. 1-800-316-316. Back with more shortly. Our talkback line open, 1-800-316-316. You can join in our conversation and you might have a question, a comment, even a critique. That's fine. Maybe your own experience within your own family. I mean, whether you got it right or whether you got it wrong. 1-800-316-316. Our special guest is Daniel Sih. His new book is called Raising Tech Healthy Humans, How to Reset Your Children's Tech Habits and Give Them a Great Start to Life. Hey, Daniel, let's talk about children. It's all very well for a parent to dictate what their children ought to do with their online device. I imagine, though, parents have got to model the sort of healthy habits. This is where it gets tricky because now you've got parents adjusting to some of the great insights you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, my first book was primarily for adults, recognizing it started because I recognized how much I was online and that there was a digital liturgy in my life that was actually shaping who I was and who I was becoming. And it was an accidental liturgy. You know, I would reach for my phone first thing in the morning and I would just automatically turn off my alarm clock and then I would press Gmail and I would start working. You know, whereas a few years before I used to wake up and pray and read the Bible. And I didn't mean to create that liturgy. It just happened. And it didn't just happen. It was designed through the tech companies of the apps I use. But and then I found at the end of the day, you know, there was one moment where I looked and I was in bed with my wife and I'm scanning something online and she's playing a game on her phone. And here we are, you know, next to the love of our lives. We've both got 3 kids. We're super busy with work. And the moment we have to be quiet with our kids and we could talk and unpack each other's day, or I don't know, do other things that married couples should do. We're you know, playing with Siri. And I was like, oh, how did this happen? And so I realized that I have a relationship with my phone. And actually, the relationship that I model with the online world is what I'm going to create as a family culture. So my first habit in the book out of the 7 habits is start with self. Start by looking at what you're imitating. It's another discipleship issue, you know, imitate me as I imitate Christ. What am I modeling and how are my own digital habits and those in my family creating a message for my kids? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. 1-800-316-316. Let's take a call. Rebecca is on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome along.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
What are your thoughts?
I've been loving everything in the conversation. It's been really helpful, thank you. And I was just wondering, the guest speaker mentioned that Minecraft was quite an addictive game. I can't stand video games myself, so I've never played them. But our kids got exposed to Minecraft at school and they quite enjoy it. Is there another suggestion that's better, that's less addictive than Minecraft?
Daniel.
It's a great question. Look, there are many different games and many apps out there. Unfortunately, the most popular ones are designed to be highly addictive. That's why they're popular. Glow Kids is an interesting book that goes really hard at Minecraft, and it talks about the design of Minecraft and how the designers actually looked at the pupils of kids and tried to create intentional design in the game so that their pupils would dilate and they would end up with fight and flight responses because, again, that makes a game more exciting, but it also ramps up the downstairs brain. In order to answer your question, look, I don't have an answer in terms of new stuff. I'll just share what I've done, but again, I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to games because I have significant concerns with some of the newer games that are on the market that are popular.
Right.
So with my son, and I talk about this in the book, he is really into strategy and he's really into games. And so I was like, okay, how do I get him engaging in games without some of the games that I didn't want him engaged in? So we just did research, and in the end, I found a game called Civilization 6 and 5, which are old games that just keep running through. They've been great. They're high-level strategy games, but they don't have flashing colors and lights. They don't have variable rewards, and they don't have social cues. And he plays that game. It's complex, and it's actually really hard, but it tests his brain. For the very first games I played, I actually went to like some of the old games I used to play, like Bubble Bobble, and downloaded them for free, and the kids loved them for a few years. And I like the Wii actually, like the old Wii, and some of the old games are great. So look, unfortunately, I'm not up with the games enough, but I think the basic principle is this: if it looks like a pokie machine, because it's flashing and moving kind of crazily, if it gives you a headache looking at the movement, like first and third player games are often like that, or lots of bright colors like Candy Crush, it is designed to be a pokie machine, okay? And if it has rewards where you have to play and then suddenly you get random rewards, and you get lots of rewards to start with, but then the rewards slow down, and so you have to play longer to get the same rewards, that's a pokie machine. And the other pokie machine is when you get likes and you have to play with other people. Like snap streaks is a classic. You know, if you don't snap back, you lose a friend. That's a pokie machine. So if they don't have those three key components, well, then it's designed probably more for education and for learning, or for healthy entertainment, as opposed to the newer games. It's just hard to find new ones that don't have that design. I'm sorry, I don't have an easy answer.
Rebecca,
That's okay.
is that helpful?
It is. Thank you very much.
Rebecca, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation today. Let's take another call. Melody is in Andamuka in South Australia. Hi, Melody. Welcome.
Oh, good day. Thank you. I've just realised your guest, I was horrified. It seems to me he's using his phone to wake him up. I thought, hasn't he got an alarm clock, a good old-fashioned alarm clock, and then he can put his phone to bed at night?
All right. Well,
that's excellent advice.
Well, your phone has an alarm on it, and it's the easiest one, I guess, these days to set, because you can set it to all sorts of specifics according to what day and what time and what week, and you can have ongoing alarms, all sorts of things. So yes, your phone becomes very valuable. And of course, Daniel, you're not talking about outlawing your phone, but we're talking about how you might use your device in a discipleship sense. And, kids are going to be needing these sorts of alarms as well, aren't they? Do you give your kids an old-fashioned analog alarm clock rather than allow them to wake up with their phone? What are your thoughts here for Melody?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, I was great comment, Melody, and it was a wrestle that I had, when I decided to get my phone out of my bedroom, which I do charge my phone out of my bedroom now. The hardest thing was, how do I wake up? I actually found that a barrier, and bizarrely, that is the barrier that comes up again and again when I say to adults, charge your phone outside your bedroom. I find old-fashioned alarm clocks a bit obnoxious. What I've ended up doing is I've used an old iPhone that has no apps and no devices on it, no internet, and it's like a $2,000 alarm clock, and that's all it does. So that ended up being my solution. Some people use Fitbits and Garmin's or other technologies like Google Nest, which don't have the ability to kind of dive in. But, I agree. It's a good point. For kids, it's different, though. For kids, no phones in bedrooms, and all cyber safety experts, pretty much all parenting experts say that. The average, there was some American data where 10% of kids check their phone at least 10 times during the night. I was chatting with a school principal of a large Christian school, I won't say where. This was just last week, and they track the data use of their kids using their own, using school devices. And what they notice is around 6 o'clock, there's a peak in internet usage because they're doing their homework and they're finishing their online assignments. And then it slowly drops off around kind of 7, 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, it's almost zero. And at 11:30, 12 o'clock, it spikes up again, way, way higher than at any point during the day. And then it continues until about, I think, 1 or 2 o'clock in the evening. So if you give your kids a device, they will use it in the middle of the night. They'll be sleep deprived. They will end up being exposed to bullying and online problems. So the number one thing you can do as a parent is say no devices and no internet in their bedrooms. Hope that helps.
Melody, thank you so much for your call. It is news time, and we're continuing this conversation after Vision National News. 1-800-316-316. If you'd like to suggest a direction we can go, a question, a comment, your own experience, You can connect with our guest today. He has a website called spacemakers.com.au. The book that he is talking about with us today is called Raising Tech Healthy Humans. It's already a bestseller, a parenting book to help parents reset their children's tech habits and give them a great start to life. We're back with more with Daniel Sih after news. Wonderful to have you with us. It is the Wednesday edition of 2020, and our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. We're talking about raising tech healthy humans. So you can help direct where our conversation goes. You might have a question, you might have a comment, you might have your own experience. 1-800-316-316. You know, it's tough being a parent, isn't it? A fast-changing, high-tech world, and even busy parents who are stretched for time are searching for insight into the tech world as it influences our kids' faith. So around this issue of discipleship, and our special guest even likes to use the word apprentice when we talk about discipleships. So how we use our online devices in an apprenticeship way as parents with our children could be very, very important. Our guest writes about kids, about tech, about productivity, about making space. He's set out to help kids enjoy the online world without losing the wonders of life beyond a screen. Sometimes we might wonder how our choices of technology within a family context are in fact a faith and discipleship issue. Well, Daniel Sih is with us. His new book is like a handbook that teaches strategies to help set up children and preteens with healthy tech and non-tech habits for life. His book is called Raising Tech Healthy Humans: How to Reset Your Children's Tech Habits and Give Them a Great Start to Life. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Hey, we'll take some calls, some more as they come through, Daniel. When we're talking electronic devices, handheld ones, there's an interesting concept that if you're in front of a desktop computer, you're more likely to be creative. But if you're holding a handheld device, somehow or other that encourages consumption. Is there something about the tech that our kids have, whether it's a mobile device or something that's on a desktop? Is there any special differences that you're aware of?
That's an interesting observation. I haven't heard that specific one, but it doesn't surprise me. Yes, I think there's a tremendous difference between, let's say, a passive screen, one that you're watching and observing, versus an active, particularly interactive screen like a tablet or a phone. There's lots of reading and research coming out about that. The two key principles I like to teach about, one is near work and far work, and the other one is about passive versus active, or lean in, lean back technology. So a passive screen, like a television, is typically a lean back technology because you're not doing anything with it. And kids look lazy when they're watching the TV, right? They look like they're just slobbing around and not doing much. But ironically, it's probably better for their brain, particularly young kids, than the lean in type of interactive, engaging iPads, particularly for young kids, where it's stimulating the anxiety and dopamine parts of their brain, which don't necessarily help them. So you could have 2 hours, that the research says you can watch 2 hours of like a passive screen before kids really starts to impact their sleep, whereas half an hour of an interactive screen game that looks like a poking machine can impact their sleep because it's slightly different. So the recommendation is, where possible, go a bit slower on some of those highly interactive devices. The other one is near work and far work, and this is tremendously important, that a handheld device is held really close to your face, like 30 to 40 centimeters, and the eyes were never designed to spend hours and hours looking at that distance. I mean, if you were to come to me, Neil, and start having a conversation with me 30 centimeters from my face, I'd feel very uncomfortable because humans were never meant to spend hours looking at that distance. And yet a meter or so back, like a TV screen, is better, which is far work. And the problem is that the World Health Organization now say that 50% of the entire world's population will be myopic or nearsighted by 2050 because of our use of screens and of staying indoors, both of which are tremendously bad for our eyesight. And so young kids in particular are vulnerable. The research is very clear that the younger the child, 6 to 8 year olds, are much more vulnerable to developing myopia and nearsightedness and long-term visual problems when they use an up-close screen on a regular basis. Once they hit 10 years old, their visual system and their brain has developed to the point where the risks go down unless they already have myopia. So we need to think about, again, screens in young kids and the devices they use.
And thinking about what they'll be as adults and whether they'll look good with that set of glasses.
And actually, look, you and I both have glasses on,
yes,
right? So
yes, we do.
It's not about glasses. I do want to say this because obviously, look, glasses work. The real problem is that when kids have severe myopia, by the age of 70, they have a 90% chance of being blind or visually impaired. It's more like skin cancer when it comes to severe myopia. So if we rapidly increase the rate of nearsightedness in young kids, they will have significant risks of long-term visual issues when they're older. So it's not about glasses; it's about preventing the significant impact of long-term myopia, and that's where I think it's more like screens being up close or far away for entertainment is more like putting sunscreen on to avoid skin cancer 40 years later.
And, you know, I was reading an article just recently about this sort of issue around eyesight, and you can actually do some good things in a therapeutic way for your eyesight by being outdoors and focusing on things that are longer distance and actually, your gaze from left to right and then back again, just exercising your eyes. Which brings us to this thought of, one of your starter framework issues is actually encouraging adventures. It's very easy to encourage an adventure online, a little bit more difficult and a little bit more time consuming perhaps for a parent to encourage adventures. But I imagine you're talking about not things that are online, but adventures on things that are happening if you've got time, afternoons or evening or into the weekends. What are your thoughts here on encouraging adventures?
Yeah, absolutely. I think adventure. So the starter framework is an acrostic, and one of the principles is to encourage, real life adventures away from a screen, because they increase our happiness and our joy and our sense of resilience. Jonathan Haidt says that we've moved from a play-based childhood culture where we would go outdoors and kick a ball and play with our friends until the sun went down, to a screen-based culture. And even if as a parent you want your kids to go outside, it's actually really hard to do that nowadays because no one's outside. And actually, like you said, the number one predictor of myopia is not being outdoors enough for kids. So we do need them to be outdoors, not just for vitamin D and mental health, but also for their vision. But it's actually really hard to do. And I think culture has changed, and we need to keep fighting as kind of communities to change it back in some way. I'm from Adelaide originally, and there used to be an amazing playground. I don't know if you ever knew of it, called Monash Adventure Playground. And it was it was amazing. It was actually the biggest tourist attraction in South Australia in the 80s at some point, with like 300,000 visitors. And there was this philanthropic farmer who basically created 200 metal play pieces. And there was this like enormous slide that was like, 40 meters off the ground. And it was so hot in summer, we had to put Hessian bags on ourselves to not kind of get skin burns going down this enormous slide. And there were these incredible, dangerous play pieces, which were just unbelievably fun. And so many kids from South Australia remember the good old days when Monash existed. But then one person put a litigation, claim for like a sprained ankle to the council in the 90s, and the council freaked out and closed it down, and they put in a few $100,000 and reopened it with like very, very boring play equipment, a tiny slide, like swings that were so safe that even the ground couldn't make you sore, and no one goes anymore. And I think it's a good analogy in my mind for how we've shifted so quickly from a culture of safety, where we've become so obsessed with safety in some forms of safety that we don't let our kids do things that just give them life and joy and resilience. And it's actually creating the opposite problem. Rather than making them safe, they're actually unsafe because they're terrified of the world. And they're on screens and exposed to things that are actually dangerous, rather than kicking a ball and riding a bike and climbing a tree and being outdoors with their friends. And so we need to get back to some of those adventures that actually make us happy. Does that make, I don't know if that connects.
As a family and perhaps as a mother-father unit, you might be thinking about how you plan those sorts of adventures, and not just something that's just off the cuff, right now let's go and do something, but you've got to sort of plan these things into your family life. I imagine that, busy families find it hard to do those sorts of plans, but somehow or other you've got to talk together and you've got to make the plan. And I imagine that even sharing your plans with your children brings and builds excitement. Any thoughts here around families that are talking? And is this the sort of thing you'd include in a conversation as you're talking about screen time and the things that we're accessing online? And bringing the alternative and saying, hey, we're going to encourage some great family adventures.
Well, you're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. I'm very conscious that we don't want to be people who just say, no more screen time, no more time on screens, don't be online so much, and then offer kids nothing to do as a result, because they can't just go outside and play with their friends anymore because their friends are online. It's really tough. So as Stephen Covey, a productivity guru, says, you want to say no for a greater yes. And what are the greater yeses that you can offer? And I think some of them are adventures. Now, when I say adventures, I don't mean they have to be hardcore kind of going out into the bush or, doing significant mountain biking type adventures. I just mean anything that involves outdoor or interesting social activity that's not on a screen. So in my book, I have an appendix of 100 non-screen activities that you can do with your kids. And a lot of people have just printed off that list and they just think about, okay, well, what could we do this week? Let's try to tick off one or two of these kind of activities over time. One of the funny ones is I just had an idea, and it was like collect a bouquet of wildflowers. And my kids read the audiobook. They actually read that section in the audiobook, and they just laughed their heads off because I've never gone and picked a bouquet of wildflowers. And they thought it was so funny. And then the next day they came home from school, and they walk home from school from the bus stop, and they all presented me with this little bouquet of wildflowers that they'd collected along the way, which was really quite funny. But again, you just have to give creative ideas to kids and then model it and get them out there and do it a bit with them. Set up the environment, and they'll usually take it from there and experience a great lot of joy from it.
Daniel, come back to the faith and discipleship elements of what we need to take control of as parents and be an influence on our children. Because my thoughts go to, I wonder whether the sorts of things you talk about in your book might be useful in children's ministries, like Sunday schools or kids' church type ministries or youth ministries in church, ways that churches can actually add value to the families who are a part of what they're doing. Churches can take an interest in here, because I know you are working with some schools. You mentioned your interactions with a school. You'd like to see more opportunities for schools here. So for groups using your booklet, your little handbook, as some way of being a blessing into the families that we're connected with, how can that work, do you think?
Yeah, look, the last principle in my framework, the starter framework, is to rely on others. I'm a tremendous believer in community and Christian community and the power of community to shape culture and to create countercultures, which is what we're meant to do as believers of Jesus in the world around us, to be salt and light. And that's really hard to do as a parent. I have a 16-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy, and I've seen a tremendous difference in the social pressure on parents to get kids social media and interactive devices and games at a young age, comparing my 11-year-old boy to when my daughter was 11 just 5 years before. Does that make sense? Culture has shifted massively in a very short amount of time. So we need to support and back each other as communities. And there's a tremendous difference being the only parent in a school whose child doesn't have Snapchat when they're in year 3 versus the only one whose parent, being in a sea of parents and only 1 or 2 kids do have Snapchat. Does that make sense? And so I think the only way we're going to be able to tackle this in the interim until legislation comes in, and it will come in, the research is now strong enough for the American Surgeon General to say that social media is not safe for children. It has not been deemed safe. It increases 3 hours or more on social media every day, which is the average for a teenager in America, now increases depression, suicide, self-harm, body image issues. There is a tremendous mental health and anxiety epidemic caused by social media. There's enough research to say that now. So legislation will come in, It's like when we knew cigarettes were dangerous, but legislation hadn't come in. We still had ashtrays in hospitals. So we're going to have to do it ourselves in the interim until the government steps in. And so I'm really passionate about working with schools to help shift the conversation across a whole collective or across a church community, and to get parents to talk about this, not to create uniform rules and to make it like legalistic, but for parents to understand the impact of some types of devices and apps and games on their kids' mind, to understand the impact of early social media usage on their mental health and anxiety levels as they grow up, and to have some practical ways to, for example, not have social media in primary schools, and to actively, from a principal down, to say we do not support or encourage social media in primary school, partly because it's illegal. I mean, you have to say you're 13 when you're not 13, but we want TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat out of our primary schools. And I'm seeing great benefits when Christian independent schools, for example, take the book, hand it out to every kind of parent, have conversations around it, or bring in other experts from different fields and have these tech conversations to create healthier humans, which are healthier disciples of Jesus.
Well, as a parent, I imagine there is partly this responsibility because while you're thinking of your own family, you often will know the parents of your children's friends. And certainly when it's a church organisation, there may be children's church ministries, there may be a youth leader, there's people that you can interact with there. And certainly for that parent who knows the school principal at their school and the teachers of their children in their classroom, there's going to be opportunity there for just spreading that word, because you've got to be able to, as you say, I think relying on others about how you build community. And here's a really proactive way, if you've got young children, of building community that's going to actually have a huge different outcome for children if they're, for those that are just left to their own devices and growing up addicted to these devices. That's got a different outcome than if you take control and responsibility as a parent. Hey, let's talk about, you've had some interaction with parents and you've asked them what their best experiences of childhood were. If you're talking about creating childhood experiences, creating memories for your own children, giving them some foundation to grow up in, even in a faith and discipleship sense, what have parents said to you about their best experiences?
I love this question. I do parenting seminars around the country or speak as keynotes, and I always ask the question, think about the best moments of your childhood and just pick a time and think about where you were, who you're with, and what made that experience so memorable for you. And classically, they're memories of being outdoors, being with people who they love, being in community, doing something adventurous, and they're rarely indoors or online. Like I asked my kids, who are pretty young still, I said, what have been some of the best memories of your life? And I loved their responses. They talked about the time they jumped on a trampoline with their friend. And that's it. They talked about how I played guitar to them at night to help them fall asleep. And I'm a really rubbish guitar player. But Dad played them guitar at night, and it was one of the best memories of their life so far. They talked about when we went to this kind of mini golf place and something funny happened and we laughed. And the memories were so simple and they were relational. They were always with loved ones, friends, family, community, just doing everyday life. And none of the experiences were about the time where, I don't know, we won a particular level on a game, or the time where we even had a family movie night. Like, I'm not trying to neglect the value of online entertainment and activity, and the book is not an anti-tech book. There's lots of positive ways you can use tech with your kids and have conversations and use tech in creative and constructive ways. It's not a don't use tech book. But I do call it Raising Tech Healthy Humans, because I want us to get back to the vision of humanity, the vision of human flourishing, which I think is a biblical vision. And a lot of that is about doing stuff that is real and raw and spiritual and communal and relational, because they're the moments that we'll look back on at the end of our life and think, wow, I'm so glad I spent time riding my bike with my friend. I'm so glad that I spent time eating spaghetti bolognese with my cousins, or that I went camping and cooked marshmallows. They won't remember the other times. They won't have those deep moments of significance. So if that's the case, why not major on more of those moments in your life right now as a family and as a school and as a church community, and think about what really matters, and then put tech within the context of a broader humanity rather than making it the center of all we do. And that's really the vision of why I called it Raising Tech Healthy Humans. It's about raising humans who love life, who love God. Yeah.
It raises a whole big issue, doesn't it? Because the parent who says, I want faith and discipleship to be a part of my parenting responsibility. I want our family to grow up knowing God, knowing His ways. There's a challenge here, isn't there, to make that discipleship fun so that your children will remember the fun activities they did in a faith context, in a way of being discipled. And as you said earlier, being apprenticed. Those things have got to have a fun element too as well. I mean, there are serious things that you're going to be talking about, but maybe the environment you're doing and using to talk about those things, a fun environment that's creating a memory. Is that an important element, or have I gone off the track here? What are your thoughts here, Daniel?
No, look, I think life should be fun. I imagine Jesus laughing and playing and being quite frivolous in some ways with his disciples as well as serious. I love the Shema from Deuteronomy 6. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then he talks about when you're walking, when you're talking, when you're on the road, when you're at the dinner table, then talk about the law of God. And there's this sense that all of life should be infused with faith. That's what discipleship is, not to separate it. I have faith on a Sunday morning, or faith when I'm singing worship songs, but I don't have faith when I'm at the dinner table, or faith when I'm doing jobs with my kids. So in that sense, I think discipleship involves faith when we're doing the dishes and getting our kids to learn to be adults. Faith when we're watching family movie night together and talking about the characters and the heroes and the things we liked and the things we didn't like. Faith when we're riding bikes and they fall down and we get them to get up and try again. Faith when they're learning to read and write because they need to develop their brain and actually contribute to the world in a kingdom way. So discipleship is all of it, and tech is part of that, but discipleship is the main game.
Well, Daniel, I think you've won a few new friends, a new fan or two, and there'll be some who are going to be saying, how do I get a hold of Daniel's handbook? And when you can consume it in around 2 hours, it's not going to be heavy weight, and it's something that you can use in the groups that you're a part of, whether it's your friendships with the families, the parents of your children's friends, or whether it's through your children's church ministry in your local church, or the youth minister, or your school teachers, the teachers of your children, or the principal, all sorts of ways that you can help build community and help there to be some very good habits formed in your children. Well, Daniel's handbook that teaches strategies to help set up children and preteens with healthy tech and non-tech habits for life is called Raising Tech Healthy Humans. How to reset your children's tech habits and give them a great start to life. And you can get some free resources. And here's a website that you can go to, access those free resources, and undoubtedly you'll be able to get a hold of the book. You might even be able to find out how you can get multiple copies of the book, because it might be useful building community to have an opportunity like this. Here's the website, raisinghumans.au/gift to access those free resources. Now, when there's free resources, there's free infographics that describe some of the things we've talked about over this past hour. There's activities for kids there on those free resources. There's digital contracts that you might have as parents with your children around getting control of those habits that we have with screen time. And you'll be able to access interviews that Daniel has done with people around the world. That website is raisinghumans.au/gift. Daniel Sih, wonderful getting your insights today, I must say, and always enjoy our conversations. But thank you so much for sharing your heart and your insights with listeners today on 2020.
No, thank you so much. It's been a joy to speak to you as usual. Thanks, Neil.